Hello, friends, and welcome back to the podcast. I have been busy. As I mentioned on my last episode, I've been quite busy. So, we've been onboarding a lot of new clients, but I'm also working on something that's very, very, very exciting that I cannot tell you about right now. But lots of exciting things to come. Yeah, a little bit slow to get this episode out, but I wanted to start to do episodes that really hone in on your specific symptoms, right? In midlife, we can start to get symptoms that are rearing their heads. Maybe you've never had these symptoms before. Maybe the symptoms have gotten worse. So I'm going to really do a bit of a series that's going to really hone in and tackle some of these common midlife symptoms. So today we're going to talk more about bloating and some tummy troubles, but really bloating. I think we're going to go into things like fatigue, brain fog, and memory issues, and weight, and stuff like this. So why don't we just dive straight on into today's episode, all about bloating. This is certainly a problem for a lot of midlife women. It definitely can rear its head in midlife. Why? Well, because we're having all these changes to our hormones, and those changes then can impact our gut health. And it is definitely the sex hormones. So estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all of those hormones can impact your gut. And you may not realize this, but there's receptors in our gut for all those hormones, but also our thyroid as well. And so when our thyroid gets hit, which it often will in midlife, and it can become a little bit more sluggish, we can absolutely feel that in our gut and become a lot more bloated. So estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, they're shifting during perimenopause. This is absolutely going to influence your microbiome. It's going to actually influence how leaky your gut is. Progesterone, estrogen, progesterone in particular, can really impact the leakiness of your gut. So if you don't know what a leaky gut is, first of all, I find that either people don't know what a leaky gut is at all, or on the flip side, they're certain they've got a leaky gut. And that is not necessarily the case. So, first of all, what is a leaky gut? So, a leaky gut is when the enterocytes or the intestinal cells in your gut, they pull apart more than what they should, causing your gut to be leaky, right? Because that gut is supposed to be a barrier between what you put in your mouth and what goes through your digestion and what gets into your bloodstream of your body. We don't want a lot of that stuff getting into the bloodstream. Now, our gut is supposed to be a little bit leaky to a certain degree, but it's not supposed to be so leaky that certain things that are never supposed to be in the bloodstream get into the bloodstream. Because when that happens, that's when danger hits. That's when we're more susceptible to autoimmune disease. We're more susceptible to inflammation, more susceptible to all kinds of issues can ensue from a leaky gut, even fatigue, right? So we don't want our guts to become super leaky, because that is definitely not healthy and can set us up for some disease states. So we want to maintain robust levels of our sex hormones, and particularly progesterone, to help to prevent a leaky gut. Now, you may not have a leaky gut. Don't assume you do. If you've worked with somebody who's told you you do, but you haven't done a leaky gut test, then they really don't understand the reality of the fact is you cannot tell somebody they've got a leaky gut without doing a leaky gut test. And no, if you've got an autoimmune disease, it does not automatically mean you've got a leaky gut. That is not true either. So don't just assume you've got one. You may well not. If you have an autoimmune disease, plenty of people do, and they don't have leaky guts. I've seen this clinically myself. The only way to know is to test. But that's a whole nother episode. Testosterone plays a huge role in something called secretory IgA in the gut, which really plays a huge role in our immune system. And estrogen also plays a big role in gut health. So we've got to keep our sex hormones nice and robust and optimal to support our gut health. And this is one of the reasons why we can get gut issues, and in particular bloating, that can ramp up in midlife. So that's really when I want to try to stay focused on bloating in this episode. I do want to just say one thing, because I really want to hammer this point home. There's a lot of talk online, and there has been for years, about inflammation. We know that inflammation is the enemy of optimal health. As our inflammation increases, our health will decrease. Inflammation drives chronic disease. So we have to get on top of that inflammation. And there's a lot of talk about inflammation online, but what I haven't seen much of, to be honest though, I really don't follow many people and I don't scroll much, but I I guess when I did do more scrolling or follow more people, I never really saw the connection being made between inflammation and gut health, but yet our gut drives inflammation or lowers it. It's the very first place you need to go to get on top of inflammation. So I have seen a lot of people in different forums talk about their inflammation and what pill can I take or peptide or whatever. It's like, no, start with the foundation. Start with the very thing that will make or break your inflammation, which is your gut health. And that's because your bacteria in your gut, if you've got too much of the quote bad, it will drive LPS, lipopolysaccharide, which is very inflammatory. And if you haven't got enough of the good bacteria, you're not making enough butyrate and short chain fatty acids, which are powerfully anti-inflammatory. So in this way, your gut is either driving up in your inflammation systemically in the body, or it's actually actively lowering it. You have to work on your gut. I don't care what your symptom is, whether it's hair loss, headaches, weight gain, mood issues, fatigue, joint aches and pains, hormonal issues. I don't care what it is. You have to work on your gut. And that means doing the right kind of stool test at least once a year and getting a professional who truly understands the microbiome. There's a lot of people and doctors out there who have zero training in the microbiome, but they run stool testing. So be very careful. You want to work with somebody who really knows the microbiome, who runs the right type of stool tests, right? And I've talked about this before, and we'll put that episode in the show notes. Make a note of that. We'll definitely put the episodes in the show notes about the right type of stool testing. Definitely have a listen to them. So you want to make sure you're working with the right person, running the right type of stool tests, and getting a protocol at least once a year, depending on what degree of gut dysbiosis you may have. That is a way to support your health now and your longevity, right? But anyway, I am definitely going a little bit off topic. Oh, before we jump into bloating, if you want to run a stool test with me, and I am a microbiome expert and I do have the training and I do run the right testing, not the popular testing, but the right testing, then my Black Friday specials are on. And they are actually, the first day is today, and they are the lowest price they have ever been. So if you are listening to this in real time, head to the show notes, go grab yourself a package before they are all gone, and they will not be around forever. It's just for Black Friday. Let's talk about bloating. So what are the top things when I have a client who comes to see me? I'm going to tell you what I think about and the things that I check off to make sure that we're getting to the root of their bloating, because the only way to kick bloating is to get to the root of it so we can deal with the root cause so that the bloating goes away, and it's gone away forever. So one of the first things that I do is I check your transit time. I have a way that I do this, but every client does transit time testing with me. It is critical, and we have to keep doing the transit time testing. So transit time is how long it takes from food to get from your mouth, obviously, into the toilet bowl. Now, you might think my transit time's perfect. I poop every day. It doesn't mean your transit time is good. You can poop every single day and still have really slow transit time. When you have slow transit time, things can putrefy, we can get a backlog, and this is when we can get a lot of LPS, that lipopolysaccharide, that can sort of leach out and cause symptoms like fatigue or skin issues, brain fog, aches and pains, but also bloating. So if you haven't got good transit time, even if you're pooping daily, you need to know your transit time. And if it's slow, you need to optimize it. And that in and of itself can eliminate bloating. Now, in the same way, right? And that's one thing that most practitioners do miss, is talking about transit time, testing transit time, and working on that transit time. Oftentimes they will jump to very expensive tests or very harmful volatile compounds that have a lot of collateral damage to the microbiome, when really all they needed to do was optimize that transit time. How do you optimize transit time? Well, one of the next things that I do, which can support transit time, is look at the thyroid. It's not always thyroid related by any means. It could be dysbiosis, right? This is, again, you'll never waste your money doing a good quality stool test it's never going to be a waste of money. There's always going to be something to work on there, in there. So it could be dysbiosis driving that transit time down, or slowing it down, or it could be your thyroid. So we always have to rule thyroid in or out. We shoot the crocodile closest to the boat, bang, let's get a full thyroid panel, which is, I'll tell you what it is in a minute. And we can tell from that thyroid panel if your thyroid is a problem and to what degree it's a problem, right? So that's a really easy thing to do, is go run a full thyroid panel, and then we do know from that thyroid panel if your thyroid is a problem. A full thyroid panel is TSH, free T4, free T3, reverse T3, and thyroid antibodies. Reverse T3 is critical, and most doctors won't run that. So if we get on top of transit time, and if we figure out whether your thyroid's playing an issue, and then we've got to get on top of your thyroid, right? So, and these things can then eliminate bloat in some people. It could be as simple as a sluggish thyroid leading to constipation, or slow transit, which is leading to your bloat. You get on top of it, bloating goes away. How do you get on top of your thyroid? Well, that is a long-term commitment. Minerals are imperative. Minerals are so important. Vitamins, minerals, doing HTMA testing, committing to HTMA testing. One and done will never work. You need to do like 3 in a year. Really commit to that mineral journey. Iodine is imperative. You can't do this alone. You have to work with somebody. It's never going to work if you try to do it alone, because you just don't have the knowledge. It's not your fault. You don't have the knowledge. You don't have the training. You don't have the clinical experience. It's never going to work. So if you try, you're going to be 6 months down the road and realize you can't do it, and then look for a practitioner. But you really need somebody who's trained in HTMA testing, who knows how to balance those minerals, because it's not about the individual ones, it's about the balance between them. Heavy metals can play a role in thyroid dysfunction. Your gut can play a role in thyroid dysfunction. Your stress, almost every time you're going to have a stress component, so you got to get on top of your nervous system. And these are all the things that I help women with, and Michelle and I help our ladies with when you work with us. So to get on top of thyroid, it might also require medication. Now, this is an area where we're not doctors. We can't prescribe medication, but we are very good at knowing what kind of medication tweaks you probably need to make. And we tell you, and you take that to your doctor. And you do need to lead your doctor sometimes. You do need to be your own health advocate, because oftentimes these doctors are jacks of all trades and masters of none, or they're allopathically trained. But we can see where your medication might be failing you, and the little tools of the trade and the tricks that you may need to implement to optimize the medication, to optimize your thyroid, to optimize your motility, to then eliminate your bloating. So those are two things: transit time and thyroid. Thyroid isn't always related to transit time, but it can be. We also think about enzymes and stomach acid. Now, there is a particular enzyme that I love. Sometimes when we give our ladies this enzyme, their bloating goes away. It's called Digest Gold. It's a really good one. So that's a little free tip for you. That can sometimes really help with bloating. It's usually... I'll be honest though, sometimes what happens is women get on this enzyme and they do see really good results and their bloating goes away, but oftentimes it's a little bit short-lived. So it's great if you go and try that and it works for you long term. That would be incredible. What an easy fix, right? And it can be but it usually is because you've got a damaged gut and therefore you're not actually making the enzymes that you need to be making. So usually there's more to it. And if you want the long-term fix, you need to do the stool testing and work with somebody who understands this stuff. But that is a good enzyme to try. And sometimes stomach acid can be really, really helpful as well. You can't be taking it if you've got gastritis or esophagitis, but sometimes stomach acid can be a really good for bloating. Sometimes you might want to rule out h.pylori. It's not as common as some are led to believe, but we always talk to our ladies about this, and there are ways to test for h.pylori that don't have to be super expensive. And sometimes h.pylori can impact your digestion and contribute to bloating. So we want to rule that in or out as well. Then we have SIBO, right? Small intestine bacterial overgrowth. If you bloat quickly after you eat, within minutes or within an hour, if you're noticing that, then you may have SIBO. If you have constipation or loose stools and you bloat really quickly after you eat or even after you drink some water, you may have some SIBO at play. There are other symptoms of SIBO too as well. If you've got really high B12, sometimes that can be a symptom of SIBO in your bloods, high B12 in your bloods, or if you have some nutrient deficiencies, if you have some skin issues, but the bloating and the constipation or loose stools can be quite telltale. But yes, we're talking about bloating. So bloating real quick after meals, instead of say you've got no bloat, no bloat, no bloat up until 8 o'clock at night, then you bloat. Maybe it's more colonic if that's your picture and you're bloating more at night. But if you're bloating more quickly in the day or after you eat or drink things quite quickly after you eat or drink, that's probably more your small intestines. And so what do you do for SIBO? You have to test. You must test, and then you must work with a microbiome expert who can create a protocol for you that is not filled with oil of oregano and berberine, which will do collateral damage. It's not necessary. You need to nurture and nourish that microbiome, and make sure if you're bringing in herbals, you're not bringing in really volatile herbals and capsules of oil of oregano and berberine, which can do a lot of damage to your ecosystem. And sometimes it can be hard to come back from that. So you want to be very careful. You need to treat the gut with kid gloves. You need to really, really be careful with it, because you can do so much damage. And I think a lot of the functional medicine space, and listen, me too, earlier on, when there really weren't many stool tests to choose from, and earlier on, I've been doing this work for a very long time, we had one source, well, the early stool tests and the early training was all about oil of oregano and berberine. But we know better now. And so if we know better, we should do better. And you certainly don't need to be using those harsh killing protocols. And I do not recommend them. So tinctures, yes, but you need to, again, you have to work with a trained microbiome expert. How do you know somebody knows what they're talking about? Well, the type of stool testing they do will give it away. And again, we'll add my episodes on that to the show notes. That will give it away. And so you can ask some questions to them. And then you can also just ask what their training was, find out where they went to school specifically for microbiome training. Okay, now the next thing we have to look at is methane. So again, you need a stool test that shows methane. If the stool test doesn't show methane, it's not a good stool test. So methane overgrowth can definitely lead to bloating. So you need the right stool test. Then you need a practitioner who knows how to get on top of methane. I will say something that I see very, very commonly in practice is hypothyroidism and methane overproduction, colonic methane overproduction. I see that very, very commonly, and it's got to do with how the thyroid, when it becomes sluggish and slows down motility, and then the microbiome and the pH go all out of whack in the gut, and then this allows the methanogens to thrive, and these are the type of bacteria that aren't quite bacteria that actually create methane. Methane slows everything down. So again, slow transit time, it may not be your thyroid, it could be methane. And if it's methane, it's slowing everything down. You're probably going to be constipated, but you can absolutely be bloated from that methane. So yes, dysbiosis is a big trigger for this slow transit and bloating. The other thing that can be dysbiotic in nature, right? So a gut dysbiotic picture can drive bloating, is if you have a lot of hydrogen sulfide. And again, you need a stool test that looks for this hydrogen sulfide. If you have run a stool test in the past, you're wondering if it's any good, then you want to go and look. Can you see methane? Can you see hydrogen sulfide? If the answer is no, then your stool test was no good. So hydrogen sulfide can cause fatigue, inflammation, bloating. Hydrogen sulfide is made from certain bacteria. And so again, this is where the stool test comes in handy. Get on top of that certain bacteria, you're going to get on top of that hydrogen sulfide. You're going to be able to, if that's the root cause of your bloating, get on top of the bloating and the fatigue and the inflammation, the other things that can happen when you have high hydrogen sulfide. One of the keys, if this is your picture, one of the key things that we have to do with our ladies is reduce their saturated fat consumption. Saturated fat, you will do well reducing it. It doesn't matter what's going on in your gut. You will not be harmed by reducing your saturated fat. We have been told, especially in the early years of functional health, and I was taught this and told this too, but it is not true. Saturated fat is harmful. Okay, you do not want to put butter in your coffee. Bulletproof coffee is a dumb idea. You don't want to be eating copious amounts of coconut products. You don't need coconut oil. You don't need coconut products. Do not cook in butter. Do not cook in ghee. Use extra virgin olive oil. It actually brings more of the good qualities, the polyphenols out of the foods. You want to lower that saturated fat in your diet as much as humanly possible. It's never going to be zero. I'm a big proponent of animal protein. It's very important to eat animal protein, in my opinion. But saturated fat can be quite harmful to your cardiovascular health and to your gut health. So In bloating, if you've got high hydrogen sulfide, it's one of the reasons is because you're eating too much saturated fat and you're feeding the bacteria that like to eat the saturated fat, and those bacteria are growing big and strong and they're emitting hydrogen sulfide. If you get stinky gas, if you have really gross smelling sulfury, rotten egg sort of sulfury gas, that's a little ding, ding, ding. You highly likely have high hydrogen sulfide. You need a stool test. You need to work with somebody who can analyze that stool test and get on top of the dysbiosis that you do have. Okay, so that's the other one. Okay, and then we have carbonated beverages. Some people don't realize, and they're drinking so many fizzy drinks or carbonated beverages and they're bloating. So just try to cut them out and see what happens. So transit time, thyroid, enzymes, stomach acid, dysbiosis, which can lead to methane overgrowth or hydrogen sulfide overgrowth or other issues, low commensal bacteria, these things, carbonated beverages, and I don't know if I said SIBO. Those are the things that we want to look at. And if we look at all of those things and tick them all off and rule them all in or out, we're going to find the root cause of your bloating. And then you need to stick with somebody and you need to really stick it out and work with that person very, very closely, depending on what's going on for you. But if you've got a lot of dysbiosis or SIBO, you've really got to be committed to the process, committed to retesting. But you will get on top of your bloating. You don't have to live with bloating. You shouldn't live with bloating. But oftentimes, I've got to tell you, that transit time, boy, oh boy, oftentimes that is the key thing. And you get on top of that, your bloat will go down. But it can be a little tricky because, like I said, if it's thyroid related, you've really got to find an open-minded doctor who's willing to work with you on your medication. And some doctors just aren't quite there yet. So that can be a little tricky. So that's all I'll say. You got to be careful with, don't be taking generic supplements. Don't try to DIY your gut health. It's going to be a disaster because if you don't know what you're doing, you can do things that can really mess things up, right? So for example, bitters, tinctures of bitters, they can cause major problems. They can really feed up the bacteria that produce hydrogen sulfide. So I don't think anyone should take a tincture of bitters. I used to recommend them. I don't anymore, just because unless I've seen a stool test and I know what's going on, and maybe we use a little bit of bitters, but you got to be careful with things like bitters, Tudka. It's all the rage, right? All these supplement companies out there are telling you everybody should have Tudka. Well, that's not true, because if you have dysbiosis and high hydrogen sulfide, you're going to make it worse. Even taurine, oxbile, NAC, these things can actually cause dysbiosis or feed into dysbiosis. NAC can actually break down the lining of the gut and can cause issues if taken too long term. You got to be really, really careful, okay? So if you're interested, like I said, my Black Friday specials are on now. If you're listening in real time, head to the show notes, go grab a Black Friday special. Let's do some stool testing. Let's get to the bottom of your bloating. It is entirely possible. Michelle and I, we know what we're doing because we are microbiome experts and we run the right testing. And with that, I will love you and leave you. I'm going to come back soon and talk about fatigue, I think, and maybe some brain fog. So if that's your issue as well as the bloating, then do not fear. We've got an episode for you coming up. All right. I hope you enjoyed this. As always, share it out, share it with your family, share it with your friends. It's how this podcast is going to get traction. It's how we're going to actually spread the truth. And that's what I'm about. I'm not about fluff. I'm not about, there's so much misinformation out there. It drives me bonkers. I'm so sick of it. I'm not about telling you to shove coffee up your butt. Coffee enemas, there's no science behind it. I'm not saying that maybe they don't have their purpose in some way, but it's not necessary. I'm going to give you the facts and the evidence. That is what I'm about. I'm about the truth, about the most honest truth we have to date when it comes to what really moves the needle for midlife women's health. So stick around. That's what I'm about. Share me out so we can get other people listening, and I will see you next time. Bye for now. If you've been thinking, I just want someone to look at my labs or my symptoms and actually explain what's going on, then this is your chance, because you can actually book a 30-minute one-on-one consultation with me where we cut through the confusion and finally get you some answers and direction. So in these sessions, we can chit-chat about you and your symptoms and your health history and what you've tried and what's worked and what hasn't. Listen, I can also take a quick look at your bloods, your HTMA tests, if you've ever had any done, stool testing, etc. And then from here, I can help you figure out your next best steps. And listen, it might just be a pile of symptoms we talk about. We don't have to look at any labs because I can really understand what's going on for you based on your symptoms. So let's chat. Let's get you some clarity. I've actually been told by many women that these 30-minute chats with me have offered them more clarity in half an hour than working with their doctor or their functional health practitioner for months. So head to the link in my bio. You'll be able to find the link there where you can book in with me and let's make sense of what's really going on for you and get you a plan of attack moving forward to get you feeling better. I am not a medical professional, and the information provided in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I do not have access to your individual medical history or circumstances, so the content discussed here should not be considered as medical advice. Before making any changes to your diet, lifestyle, or considering the use of supplements, please consult with a qualified healthcare professional or your doctor to ensure it's safe and appropriate for your specific situation. Any decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are at your own discretion and risk. Thank you for tuning in.